I even looked up. A chair scraped, a fork dropped, and then my grandfather's voice cut straight through the noise. "You've been getting disability payments for years." Every face turned toward me. I felt the heat rise, the air tighten, the kind of silence that doesn't wait for an answer, just a reaction. I managed one breath, then whispered, "What do you mean?" That's when I noticed the man standing behind him holding a closed folder. My parents wouldn't meet my eyes, and before anyone said another word, he opened it. The shock was a physical blow, not a sudden impact, but a slow, insidious, meaning, proceeding in a gradual, subtle way, but with harmful effects, spread of ice through my veins. It was the moment the comfortable lie I'd lived, the lie of my own profound insufficiency, shattered, revealing the cruel veneer, meaning, an attractive but misleading outward appearance of my family's reality. This wasn't just a matter of stolen funds, it was the retrospective, meaning, looking back on or dealing with past events or situations, understanding of every single slight, every ignored struggle, every reminder to be tougher. That $35 field trip fee, the broken laptop, the unaffordable textbooks, each moment was now recontextualized not as a necessity of their poverty, but as an intentional act of emotional and financial malfeasance, meaning wrongdoing. Especially by a public official or, in this context, a person in a position of trust. The world tilted, showing me the underside of their perfect facade, a meticulously curated life built on the quiet, 10-year expropriation, meaning, the action of the state or an authority taking property from its owner for public use or, metaphorically, the taking of one's due resources by another, of my medical support. I was suddenly dispossessed, meaning, deprived of land, property, or other possessions, not just of money, but of my own struggle, which they had profited from while simultaneously condemning. In the silence of that dining room, a philosophical truth dawned, one that resonates across the great narratives of history, from the betrayal of Caesar to the manipulation in Shakespeare's tragedies. The most profound wounds are often inflicted not by enemies, but by those closest to us, those who hold our unspoken trust. This realization, while devastating, was also a liberation, cutting the last invisible thread of obligation that tethered me to their expectations. The concept of fiduciary duty, an idiom meaning, a legal or ethical relationship of trust between two or more parties, was a concept they had grotesquely violated, yet their violation provided the raw material for my own reconstruction. For an English learner, the gravitas, meaning, seriousness or solemnity of manner, of the moment lies in recognizing that truth, the bedrock of all communication, is the first casualty in systems of deceit. The quiet realization that my 10 years of hardship were not an accident of fate, but a deliberate act of parental calculation became the true emotional core of my journey forward. It required a silent, immediate realignment of my entire self-perception, moving from the perpetual position of the supplicant to the undeniable stance of the injured party, the possessor of the facts. The air was thick with unspoken recrimination and revealed selfishness, the scent of a decade of betrayal. To maintain my composure, I focused intensely on the small ephemera, meaning, things that exist or are used or enjoyed for only a short time, on the table, a smear of cranberry sauce, the reflection of the chandelier in a water glass. This was a technique of psychological self-preservation, a mental anchor against the rising tide of internal chaos. The man, Stevens, stood impassive, a human embodiment of the uncompromising veracity, meaning, conformity to facts, accuracy of the paperwork in his hand. My own lack of awareness of these payments was itself a profound indictment of the control my parents maintained. They hadn't just taken the money, they had taken the knowledge of its existence, thereby robbing me of the agency to seek help and live a less painful life. The weight of $280,000 wasn't just a monetary figure, it was a physical manifestation of all the pain, the dropped classes, the cold meals, and the constant, debilitating anxiety they had monetized. This singular moment, where the truth was physically presented, became the fulcrum upon which the next chapter of my life would pivot, forcing a confrontation not with them, but with the version of myself they had engineered. How does the painful revelation of a deeply buried truth force us to fundamentally redefine our personal history and the nature of our closest relationships? I grew up in a house where silence traveled faster than truth. My parents, Linda and Mark, liked things neat, predictable, controlled. I learned early that the easiest way to keep the peace was to make myself smaller, quieter, easier to ignore. My younger sister, Emma, never had to learn that. She was the sun in every room she entered. When she asked for something, it appeared. When she struggled, someone stepped in before she even felt the fall. Dad used to say, she just needs a little more support. Support was the one thing I never seemed to qualify for. I remember the first time I felt the imbalance in my bones. I was 12, standing in the kitchen with a field trip form in my hand. The fee was $35. Mom barely looked up from the bills. "We can't do extras this month," she said. Minutes later, Emma burst in, waving a flyer for dance lessons. Mom smiled. "Of course, sweetheart. Same week, same bills, different rules." By high school, the pattern didn't break. It deepened. When Emma's laptop cracked, Dad ordered her a new one the same day. When mine stopped working, he told me to use the library. Emma got private tutors. I got a reminder to work harder. That was how our house worked. 2 kids, 2 realities. One truth nobody said out loud. Then came the injury, a slip on wet tile during my part-time shift. My back never fully recovered after that. I moved slower. I learned to lift carefully. I kept receipts for every bottle of medication because I never knew when I'd need to stretch them. I showed Mom the first prescription once thinking she'd worry. She just sighed, "You need to be tougher, Iris. Don't depend on anyone." That sentence became a rule stitched into everything I did. College made it worse. Emma went to a private school across town. Mom bragged about it for months. I went to community college and worked nights shelving boxes. When my textbooks were too expensive, I dropped a class. When Emma's electives didn't fit her schedule, they hired a counselor to help her navigate, meaning to plan and direct the course of a difficult situation. The memory that stayed with me most happened in our kitchen. I had just gotten home from work. My back ached so sharply, it felt like someone had tucked a knife between my ribs. I placed the crumpled prescription on the counter next to a bottle with only 2 pills left. Mom was seasoning chicken for dinner. She didn't turn around. "Can you help me cover this?" I asked. She kept cutting. "You're stronger than this, Iris. Don't be dramatic." Beside her, the kitchen glowed with brand new appliances they'd bought that spring. Stainless steel, polished, untouched by struggle. I stood there under the dim overhead light holding a bottle that rattled empty. That was the moment I understood. Effort didn't matter. Pain didn't matter. Need didn't matter. Only hierarchy did. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just nodded and tucked the bottle into my bag. That was the day I learned exactly where I fit in this family. An idiom meaning one's place or role within a group. This history of disparity, meaning a great difference, often unfair, between 2 or more things, was a classical case study in familial emotional neglect, a microcosm, meaning a community, place, or situation regarded as encapsulating in miniature the characteristic features of something much larger, of larger societal issues where privilege and access are unevenly distributed. The philosophical undercurrent here is the examination of existential validation, meaning the process of affirming one's existence or worth, and how it is either granted or withheld in an environment of perceived scarcity, though the scarcity was, in fact, entirely manufactured. My survival mechanism, the quiet stoicism, meaning the endurance of pain or hardship without the display of feelings and without complaint, was misinterpreted by them as strength, giving them the moral alibi, meaning an excuse or defense for not being at fault, to deny me aid. Historically, this dynamic mirrors the ancient Greek concept of the pharmakon, a substance that is both a remedy and a poison. My independence, the result of their neglect, became the very justification for their continued betrayal. I became adept at a form of pragmatic, meaning dealing with things sensibly and realistically, budgeting, which, for the English learner, highlights the practical necessity of frugality, meaning The quality of being careful in the use of money or food, born out of necessity, not choice. The sheer, physical reality of the disability, the persistent back pain, was an uninvited partner in my life, an unassailable, meaning, unable to be successfully attacked, questioned, or defeated, fact that contrasted sharply with their dismissal. The poignant, meaning, evoking a keen sense of sadness or regret, irony of Mom's instruction, don't depend on anyone, is that she and Dad were, in fact, deeply dependent on my disability for their lifestyle upgrades. This historical context of my formative years, the relentless need to be self-sufficient, meaning, needing no outside help in satisfying one's basic needs, laid the groundwork for my later, silent, and meticulous approach to uncovering the truth. The meticulous tracking of my medical expenses was not just bookkeeping, it was an unconsciously compiled chronicle, meaning, a factual written account of historical events, of their ethical failures, a silent, damning ledger that would eventually serve as the most powerful evidence against them. This deep dive into my past solidified the understanding that the betrayal was systemic, not momentary, and that my subsequent action needed to be equally structured and uncompromising. If self-sufficiency is forced upon us through betrayal, does that hard-won independence become a source of strength or a perpetual wound? Back at the dinner table, the room felt smaller than I remembered. The lights were warm, but nothing about the moment felt warm at all. My parents, Linda and Mark, sat at the center where they always sat, angled toward the relatives who mattered to them most. My younger sister, Emma, leaned close to Mom, whispering something that made them both smile. I watched the curve of their shoulders, the ease of their breathing. It was the kind of comfort I had never been invited into. Grandpa sat at the opposite end, the only person in the room who wasn't pretending this night was normal. His jaw was tight, and his eyes kept tracing the shape of my face as if he was searching for something. Confirmation, maybe a truth he hoped wasn't true. The man behind him, the one holding a closed folder, hadn't been introduced. But I knew he wasn't family. His posture was too straight, his presence too official. Later, I would learn he was an auditor Grandpa hired. But in that moment, he was just another reason my chest tightened. Dinner clattered along, small talk, compliments about the food, Emma talking about her next vacation, my parents nodding like they curated her entire life. I kept my hands in my lap, fingers woven into each other to keep them steady. Grandpa didn't touch his fork. He waited. Then he did it again, said the same line he'd thrown at me minutes earlier. You've been getting disability payments for years. He didn't shout this time. He spoke calmly, too calmly, letting the words land one by one. The table quieted again. A cousin glanced at me, puzzled. Emma looked annoyed, like the interruption inconvenienced, meaning, caused trouble or difficulty for her. I felt something sink inside me. Not fear, not anger, something heavier, a slow dawning that everyone in the room knew more about my life than I did. My throat tightened. I heard myself whisper the only thing that made sense. What do you mean? Mom's fingers froze around her napkin. Dad stared at his plate as if he could fall into its reflection. Nobody answered. Not a single person. The man with the folder took one small step forward. And for the first time all night, I understood. Whatever this was, it wasn't a mistake. I excused myself before anyone could speak. No one tried to stop me. That was the strange part. You would think a daughter walking away from a table full of extended family after being accused of receiving benefits she'd never seen would cause at least one voice to rise. But nothing followed me except the dull hum of conversation, restarting the way people do when they want to pretend a scene didn't happen. The historical and literary echo of the scene is one of a domestic inquisition, meaning a period of prolonged and intensive questioning or investigation, where the protagonist must recognize that the entire environment is staged, a theater of false peace. The sheer apathy, meaning lack of interest, enthusiasm, or concern of my family in letting me walk out without protest was the final, undeniable proof of my peripheral, meaning relating to or situated on the edge of something. Standing in their lives, a powerful metaphor, meaning a figure of speech in which a word or phrase is applied to an object or action to which it is not literally applicable, for my entire existence under their roof. Grandpa's calculated, silent action, hiring the auditor, was an act of profound, belated rectification, meaning the action of putting something right, a rare moment of justice cutting through the generational silence. For English learners, the phrase, the kind of silence that doesn't wait for an answer, just a reaction, beautifully encapsulates the concept of passive aggression, an idiom for, characterized by indirect resistance to the demands of others, where the atmosphere itself is a weapon. As I retreated to the hallway, I engaged in an act of profound self-emancipation, meaning the fact or process of being set free from legal, social, or political restrictions. I deliberately chose silence as my weapon, the same currency they had used to control me. My departure was not a retreat of shame, but a strategic withdrawal to gather strength and facts. The focus on the framed picture in the hallway of Mom, Dad, and Emma, excluding me, was a visceral, visual confirmation of the family's established narrative, a perfect exemplar, meaning a person or thing serving as a typical example or appropriate model of their selective reality. My calm, measured reaction, a defense mechanism honed over years of being the outsider, an idiom meaning a person who does not belong to a particular group, became my greatest asset in that moment of crisis. The philosophical teaching here is that true power often resides not in the dramatic confrontation, but in the quiet, methodical pursuit of truth. An understanding that transcends the immediate emotional need for vengeance and prioritizes the long-term establishment of personal sovereignty, meaning supreme and independent power or authority. In moments of profound crisis, how do we transform our most painful survival mechanisms into tools for personal empowerment? I stood in front of the framed photo for a moment, letting the air cool my skin. My heart wasn't racing. It was moving slowly, steady, like it had finally given up being startled by this family. I reached for the strap of my canvas bag, the same one I used every day. Inside were folded receipts for copays, a prescription bottle with 2 pills left, and a small notebook where I tracked my medical expenses. I used to think those details made me responsible. Now they felt like evidence. Evidence of a life built without the support I was supposedly receiving. I slipped into the bathroom across the hall. The mirror caught the fuzziness of the overhead light. I pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of my nose, my usual reflex, when something heavier than anger settled in my chest. My reflection looked calm, too calm, like someone waiting for instructions. I sat on the closed toilet lid and opened my notebook. Every page was filled with dates, numbers, sheep ink bleeding into cheap paper. Rent, medication, groceries, bus fare, clinic fees. I ran my thumb over the corner of the page, remembering nights I stayed up calculating whether skipping one meal could stretch my prescriptions an extra week. I always told myself the math was temporary. I didn't know my parents were doing their own math with money meant to keep me standing. I pulled out my phone. There were no new messages, no missed calls, nothing from my parents asking where I'd gone. Typical. I opened the banking app. My balance stared back. Small, predictable, painfully honest. I scrolled through the past year. Nothing unusual. No deposits that didn't belong to me. Certainly nothing like the disability benefits Grandpa had claimed existed. My pulse didn't spike. Instead, a cold clarity, meaning the quality of being coherent and intelligible, settled into me, the kind that makes everything quiet and sharp. I typed an email to the benefits office, fingers moving without hesitation. Hello, I'm writing to request a full history of disability payments issued under my name. Please confirm all addresses on file. Thank you. No dramatics, no explanation, just a question that for 10 years should have belonged to me. The bathroom, that most private and functional of spaces, became my temporary sanctuary, meaning a place of refuge or safety, a physical and metaphorical interlude, meaning an intervening period of time. This meticulous, forensic, meaning relating to the use of scientific methods to investigate crime, or Metaphorically, a detailed investigation, review of my own life's financial details was an act of profound self-reclamation. The contrast between my threadbare receipts and the revelation of the six-figure theft highlighted the vast gulf between their stated reality and my lived experience. The philosophical weight of this paragraph is the concept of agency, meaning the capacity of a person to act independently and make their own free choices, and the systematic denial of it. My parents didn't just steal money, they stole my right to a less arduous life, forcing me into a constant state of precarity, meaning the state of being uncertain or dependent on chance. The quiet email to the benefits office was the true climax of the moment, a direct, unambiguous, meaning not open to more than one interpretation, assertion of my adult identity and autonomy. I bypassed the emotional confrontation with my parents, recognizing it as a distraction, and went straight to the source of the fact, a move that echoes the wisdom of Sun Tzu in The Art of War. Choose your battleground wisely. The English lesson here is the power of concise, factual communication in a crisis. No need for dramatic language, just the undeniable pull of documentation. The quiet calculation on the laptop later that night, multiplying the monthly payment by 10 years, transformed a vague accusation into a concrete, emotionally detached figure, $280,000. This numerical precision served as an anodyne, meaning something that soothes or calms, to the emotional pain, a focus on what is rather than why. The final whispered thought, "I won't fix what they've broken," is a profound statement of personal growth, a refusal to take on the burden of their moral failure, signaling a shift from a dependent daughter to an independent executor of justice. This marked the complete severing, meaning dividing by cutting or slicing, or, metaphorically, ending a relationship or connection of the emotional tie and the establishment of an unbreakable boundary. When faced with a fundamental breach of trust, is the pursuit of emotional closure as important as the pursuit of factual justice? When I returned to the dining room, I didn't walk back to my seat. I stood near the doorway watching. Grandpa was still at his end of the table, arms crossed. The auditor, a man named Stevens, as I would learn, remained standing, his folder still closed. My parents pretended nothing was happening. Emma scrolled on her phone. I could have confronted them, asked why they took what wasn't theirs, why they let me live in struggle while they remodeled kitchens and sent Emma on trips, why they told relatives I refused to help myself. But confrontation was their language, not mine. Silence had always been the currency of my survival. Now it could be the architecture, meaning the complex or carefully designed structure of something, of my control. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair and slipped it on. Grandpa noticed. His eyes softened just slightly, but he didn't call out. He didn't need to. He already knew I wasn't leaving in fear. I was leaving to build something. Outside, the air was cold, thin enough to scrape the inside of my throat. I walked to the end of the driveway, the sound of gravel shifting under my shoes. Streetlights lined the road like sentries, meaning soldiers stationed to keep watch. I stood beneath one and opened my bag, pulling out the small stack of receipts. Years of survival, not 1 cent of it supplemented by the payment I apparently received. The wind lifted the corners of the paper. I held them tighter. When I got home to my apartment in Seattle later that night, the hallway light flickered the way it always did. I didn't turn it off. I spread everything on the floor, receipts, medical bills, letters, my notebook. I sat cross-legged in silence, letting the hum of the refrigerator fill the room. Then I began assembling, categorizing, cross-checking. I didn't need to know why my parents did what they did. I needed only the facts. Facts didn't waver. Facts didn't lie. Facts didn't love one child more than another. I created a spreadsheet on my laptop, filling cells with numbers, dates, diagnosis. I added a column for estimated disability support I should have received. When I looked up the approximate monthly amount and multiplied it by 10 years, I felt nothing, not anger, not shock, just the weight of truth settling into place. Hour by hour, the spreadsheet grew. A quiet blueprint, a map of a life lived without the help that had been meant for me. Around midnight, my email chimed. The benefits office had acknowledged my request. I stared at the screen, then at the scattered papers around me. I exhaled slowly. This time, I whispered to the empty room, I won't fix what they've broken. The second return to the dining room, captured here, is an act of supreme fortitude, meaning courage in pain or adversity, and strategic control. The decision to forego the dramatic confrontation and instead merely claim my coat and leave is a masterclass in psychological warfare. It communicates complete disinterest in their excuses and absolute certainty in my position. The quiet affirmation, silence had always been the currency of my survival. Now it could be the architecture of my control, is a powerful philosophical statement on the reappropriation of a survival mechanism as a tool for power. This echoes the historical wisdom of nonviolent resistance, where the refusal to engage on the oppressor's terms ultimately undermines their authority. The juxtaposition, meaning, the fact of two things being seen or placed close together with contrasting effect, of the expensive, polished home with my humble, flickering apartment light, which felt honest, is a symbolic representation of the contrast between their false luxury and my hard one, meaning, achieved only after a great deal of effort, integrity. The final, detailed act of building the spreadsheet, the digital archiving, meaning, collecting and storing records or data of my injury, bills, and lost benefits, transforms my personal pain into an incontrovertible, meaning, not able to be denied or disputed, legal document. This shift from emotional chaos to methodical collation, meaning the action or process of gathering and arranging in proper order, is a key theme in personal growth, turning trauma into data and data into decisive action. The universal wisdom here is that accountability must be built on facts, not feelings, a lesson vital for navigating both personal crises and the complex world of professional English where clarity and evidence are paramount. My quiet affirmation, I won't fix what they've broken, is the final declaration of my emotional divorce, a boundary set that is as clear and unyielding as the lines in my spreadsheet. How does the transformation of subjective pain into objective, verifiable data grant us a decisive form of emotional and practical power? I returned to my parents' house the next day, the driveway already full. Cars lined the curb like someone was hosting a celebration, not waiting for a truth to detonate, meaning to explode or cause to explode, or, metaphorically, to burst forth suddenly. I stood at the edge of the walkway for a moment, letting the winter air settle over me. My breath rose in thin white strands before disappearing. That part felt fitting. Inside, the dining room looked exactly the same as it had the night before. Same warm light, same long table, same arrangement with my parents, Linda and Mark, seated in the center as if they were the hosts of something grand. My younger sister, Emma, sat next to Mom, chin in hand, scrolling on her phone. Grandpa remained at the far end, posture straight, eyes sharp, and the man he'd brought, the auditor named Stevens, stood behind him again, folders still closed. No one greeted me, not unusual. Stevens glanced at me with a subtle nod. Grandpa's jaw tightened, a silent signal between us that today wouldn't be like last night. "Let's get this done," Grandpa said. His voice was steady, formal, stripped of the warmth he usually carried. It wasn't anger. It was authority, the kind I hadn't seen him use in years. Mom shifted in her seat. "Dad, can we not do this right now?" "Iris is clearly." He raised one hand. She went silent. "This isn't about Iris," he said. "This is about what was taken from her." Mark cleared his throat, trying to sound calm. "We didn't take anything. There's been a misunderstanding." Stevens stepped forward. No introduction, no preamble. He opened the folder. The sound it made, paper sliding against paper, cut cleaner than any accusation. Inside were neatly stacked documents, arranged by year, 10 years worth. He placed the first sheet on the table, a monthly payment column, under my name, under an address, my parents' address. He placed another sheet, another year, same pattern, same deposit, same signature, my mother's. Stevens tapped a line on the page with the end of his pen. "These payments were issued to support Iris's medical condition," he said. "Every deposit was rerouted to this household instead of her residence." Mom's face drained of color. Emma stopped scrolling. Dad leaned back, arms crossed tight as if bracing for impact. "We use that money for the family," he muttered. "For your vacations?" Stevens asked quietly. "For the remodel? For the SUV you purchased 5 years ago." Mom blinked fast. "We had expenses, and the school wasn't cheap." The room pressed in on itself. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Every number on those pages spoke for me louder than I ever had the chance to. Stevens placed the final sheet on the table. A summary, 10 years, monthly deposits, totaling more than $280,000. I watched my parents' faces shift. First denial, then calculation, then something hollow and brittle, the kind of expression people get when they realize a story they crafted no longer belongs to them. Grandpa pushed back his chair. The sound echoed. He pointed at Linda and Mark. "Anything to say?" The question didn't roar this time. It landed cold and flat like a verdict, meaning a decision on a disputed issue. Mom's voice cracked. We thought she didn't need it. She's always been so independent, meaning not depending on another for livelihood or subsistence. You told everyone she was irresponsible, Grandpa cut in. You let her go without medication. You let her work through pain so you could upgrade your kitchen. Dad looked at me, his eyes darting between fear and something like shame. "We were going to tell you eventually," when Grandpa asked. Silence filled the room. The kind of silence that doesn't ease, it tightens. I stood still, hands folded loosely in front of me, my canvas bag hung at my side. I felt strangely weightless, meaning having little or no weight, or, metaphorically, feeling free from burden. Not vindicated, not triumphant, just present. Here. Finally, in a moment that wasn't built on anyone else's narrative. Stevens closed the folder. The accounts linked to these deposits will be frozen pending investigation. Iris will be contacted directly regarding restitution, meaning the restoration of something lost or stolen to its proper owner, or compensation for loss or injury. Mom's breath hitched, a small, sharp sound. Dad's shoulders slumped. Grandpa turned to me. "You don't have to stay here," he said. "You don't owe them anything." I nodded once. Not to him, to myself. I picked up my coat from the back of my abandoned chair. The fabric felt cool, familiar. I slipped it on, tightening the collar gently. No goodbye, no final words, just the soft scrape of my footsteps as I walked out. Behind me, the silence finally broke. Not with shouting, just with the sound of people realizing the truth had already chosen its side. This final act of confrontation and departure is the ultimate exercise of the self-possession I had fought for. The dramatic tension is built entirely on the presentation of facts. The documents are the true protagonists of the scene, speaking with an impartiality, meaning equal treatment of all rivals or disputants, that no emotional argument could achieve. The historical context is the universal theme of justice served not through passion, but through rigorous accounting, a principle that underpins all modern legal systems. The parents' flimsy defense, "We thought she didn't need it. She's always been so independent," is a classic example of projection, a psychological term for unconsciously taking unwanted emotions or traits you don't like in yourself and attributing them to someone else, turning their own selfish act into a supposed compliment to my strength. The moment I felt strangely weightless is the catharsis, meaning the process of releasing and thereby providing relief from strong or repressed emotions, of the decade-long lie lifting from my shoulders. For an English learner, Grandpa's line, "This isn't about Iris. This is about what was taken from her," is a powerful example of rhetorical framing, shifting the focus from the victim's perceived flaw to the perpetrator's crime. My final, silent walkout, the ultimate nonverbal communication, meaning communication without the use of words, is the definitive boundary. It communicates that the debt is not just financial, but moral, and that the relationship is beyond repair. It is the final, unassailable, meaning unable to be successfully attacked or defeated, proof that the truth, when patiently and methodically gathered, holds more destructive and constructive power than any sudden outburst of rage. The profound wisdom is that the end of one's story of victimization is marked not by a triumphant cry, but by the quiet, assured steps of walking away.